a lot of our speakers and taking care of them. So I appreciate all of Mary Jo's help on getting this series ready. And we see it as a way of giving a tribute, memory of a person who was not only a great moral theologian, but personally very inspiring to many of us. I will never forget the night after he had some sort of stroke, and I said, "You don't have to give this lecture," and he said, "Yes, I'm going to," and I had to about boost him up on this platform, and he got up and gave this wonderful lecture after having undergone this stroke. So it was with a great sense of gratitude that we dedicate this series to him. All of the talks have got to do in one way or another with moral theology, in honor of Father McCormick, a moral theologian. So we have some of the fine moral theologians in the country coming here. We've included in the handout that I hope people have not only the notes for my lecture, but an article I wrote about Father McCormick, and a lot of you have seen it already, but it's a way of my personal way of expressing my gratitude to him, to share that with others. My topic tonight is on sexuality and moral theology. And when we talk about sexuality, we enter a very mysterious realm, something that we don't finally understand completely, that always exceeds our rational grasp. Sexuality brings up the mystery dimension of life. I suggest that there's at least three kinds of sexuality you can think about. One is gender sexuality, that is, we are males and females, and we interact as males and females. That stamps our whole being. Then there's also then the affective side of sexuality, the interpersonal side of it. And then finally there's the familiarity of the genital sexual activity. So I'm going to look at a number of those areas throughout this talk this evening. And we're drawing on the area of moral theology. Theology is really one science, but it can be broken down into different aspects or branches or perspectives, and one of those is moral theology. And a lot of people have contributed to that field. In our own time, we've had some great ones, and one I was privileged to study under was Father Bernard Herring, great redemptorist and a person who taught in Rome and influenced a whole lot of people. Probably a lot of people have heard. How many people here have ever heard Father Herring speak? Well, maybe not as many as I would have thought. I can tell you, you've heard other speakers who have been influenced by him. He's a giant in the field, and one that I will be drawing on some of his ideas throughout this talk. For people who read books, I wrote down some book titles. People want to explore various aspects of all of this. I suppose that one by the Whiteheads is good, A Sense of Sexuality. I guess I was going to pick one out that's sort of readable and understandable and up-to-date and so on. It would be by James and Evelyn Whitehead, A Sense of Sexuality. Now, I've divided my talk up into three major areas, and as I often do, I'll use some composite stories to try to get at the point. First of all, I'm talking about this gentleman that I am calling Aaron. So Aaron is a married man. He's Catholic. He grew up in the Catholic Church. His wife is Catholic. They hold the values of the Church to be important. And they've had a good marriage, and they've produced some good children. And he's been a faithful husband throughout his married life. And now comes along a time in his life when he's sort of feeling the blahs. He's feeling like maybe he never was as great as he thought he would be. Never quite measured up to his ideals. And he finds a lot of ennui, lassitude, weakness of spirit. He has trouble getting excited about things, and it all feels pretty humdrum, including his sexual relationship with his wife. All very familiar, and his trouble really getting geared up for much of anything in life, including his job and so on. And it's at that point, trying to wrestle with all this and figure out what it all means, that he gets sort of infatuated with this secretary at work, a woman who always looks good when she comes to work. She's always well dressed and so on. And she obviously has an eye for him and gives off a few signals, and he begins to catch those signals and responds to them in some ways, and before long they're talking in a more intimate way, and they find their ways to get out to lunch together, and finds himself having sexual fantasies about her, and gets at sort of a crisis point, like what's he going to do about this? Finds himself excited in a new way. He's got energy that surprises him, that he didn't know he had anymore. Sexual drive's reawakened. Feels good. Oh, it's a great kind of experience, and trying to figure out now what to do about all of this. Well, there's a message that comes to him from the culture which says something like this: hey man, pursue it. I mean, get with it here. This is a great opportunity for you. The message is something like this: look, your sexual capabilities and so on, that's your autonomous possession. That's yours. And in this individualistic culture, you can do anything you want with it. In fact, that desire that's awakened in you almost sounds like a right to pursue it. If you got a desire, you got a right somehow to pursue that and to find that fulfillment. And the culture says that really anything goes between two consenting adults if the secretary's interested, which she is, and why not? Two adults, free people, why not pursue it and go ahead and move forward in this relationship and begin to have intercourse with her and carry on an affair with her? You can get away with that, and that ought not be a problem. If you feel guilty about it, or sense you'll feel guilty, that probably shows that you are neurotic in some way and have not achieved any kind of real maturity in life. There's also another element in this cultural analysis and that is, where is the secretary in all of this? And whatever else you say, she's in a dependent position. He's the boss, and she works for him. He's got a lot of money. She doesn't. He has a lot of power and status in the community. She doesn't. It's a very unequal power relationship that's going on in this particular encounter. And when talks to some of his buddies about this and some of his friends, he says, I'm a Catholic. And I've gotten, that Catholic faith tells me I ought not be doing this. And part of the message he gets in return is, well, that's sort of stupid. That church of yours is unenlightened. It's out of date. I don't know what they're talking about. That was nice in the medieval world, but we live in a modern world now. And it's a very new kind of situation. They say in the notes here that the cultural message something is good sex is pleasurable, it's healthy, as long as you don't get a disease. Make sure you find out she doesn't have any sexual diseases. Make sure you use a condom so she doesn't get pregnant. And you should make sure you don't really manipulate her or force her into this. Well, that's the cultural message that comes across. Now I want to try to look at this from a Christian perspective, drawing from the world of moral theology. Now what's interesting, I think, about moral theology since sometime in the 19th century and through the 20th is it realizes it has to be in dialogue with other disciplines. Moral theology is not just an autonomous kind of practice or discipline, but it needs to be in dialogue with things like psychology and sociology and philosophy and dogmatic theology. And I always found Bernard Herring to be helpful that way. As I said, I studied under Father Herring at Union Theological in New York, had a course from him. It was a great experience. He was a holy man. He gave the retreat to Pope Paul VI when he was first made Pope, and had quite a high standing in the Vatican in those days. His whole bent however, was against what he called legalism. Every class had something against legalism. He didn't like legalism because he felt it led to minimalism. So if you followed that thing, it would sort of be, the advice to Aaron would be, well, sort of see what you can get away with here. Don't have intercourse, but anything else would go, and because that probably would be a mortal sin. So Father Herring didn't like that. He thought legalism was what messed us up as Christians, and we had to move beyond that. And every question, I can't seem to get by him without telling this one story, and many people here have heard it many times, but maybe there's someone here who didn't hear it, and I like the story, so I'll tell it anyway. But whenever a question was asked of Father Herring in class, it became a diatribe against legalism. So they asked him one day, well, what about optional celibacy? Should we allow priests to get married? And he says, aha, very difficult question. We have to be careful not to divide the church on this issue, but I think we should move in the area of freedom, greater freedom. Yeah, that's how we should proceed, sort of gradually. We should start to ordain married men. That's the procedure here. Start to ordain married men, ordain some doctors, and ordain some engineers, and ordain some lawyers, but not too many of those. Whatever the question was, it was some sort of shot at legalism. That was the great problem with Catholic life. Catholic life, the problem was just what could you get away with? How long could you French kiss before it was a sin? Or how much could you steal before it was a mortal sin? What were the legal limits? And that led to this minimalism that he hated so much. He himself was a passionate, dedicated man, generous. So he wanted another kind of approach. He wanted us to have a Christocentric approach. He said moral theology is all about learning how to follow Christ. He wrote 3-volume work called The Law of Christ. The law of Christ was to love generously, wholeheartedly, love God, your whole being, love your neighbor as yourself. He wrote another 3-volume work called Free and Faithful in Christ. That's what he wanted. He wanted us to be liberated from this legalism. He wanted us to be fully alive Christians, be dedicated to Christ, and in that, all of that, to be responsible, faithful kind of followers of Jesus. So we begin to get a whole other kind of moral theology that results from that kind of thinking. And of course, it's become commonplace now, and we hear it in sermons, and we hear it in the religious education programs, and so on. Not just following the 10 Commandments, but follow the great law of love, in which it's really not a law at all. It's an ideal, it's a prompting, it's a calling, it's a summons from God to live passionately, wholeheartedly as a disciple of Christ. Another perspective from moral theology would be to see sex not as this autonomous possession, which I think is the fundamental notion in the culture, in our individualistic culture. Stop and think, what's the message? Sex is an autonomous gift. It's mine, I'll use it like I want. I don't want other people invading my privacy, and I'm going to do whatever I can do as long as it is freely involves another person and isn't coercive. Most people in the culture think rape is wrong, for example. So here we begin to see sexuality not as an autonomous possession, but as a free gift from God to be used responsibly. And that this gift from God has an ultimately mysterious character to it. One of the part of the dialogue I think is very helpful between moral theology is with the philosopher Paul Ricoeur. Paul Ricoeur has an awful lot to say about this, and what Ricoeur thinks is that we have gone through 2 stages in the history of sexuality. One is where sex was identified with religion, and so there was such a thing as sacred prostitution. And so the sexual activity was a way of getting in touch with the gods, of repeating their fertility acts. The gods had created the world by their own sexual intercourse, and human beings participated in that power. And then came along Judaism, and Judaism cut that Judaism stopped the sacred prostitution, and it said, no, God freely created us as males and females. And that sexuality has its own integrity, and it has its own meaning apart from repeating the actions of the gods in the beginning. The world is fertile because God blesses us, not because people are involved in sexual intercourse to make the crops grow. So it effectively cut that bond between religion and sexual activity. And Ricoeur thinks that we then played that out all the way into our own time, where sex got more and more separated out as this autonomous activity. And it became more and more technologized, that the big thing was to have the right sexual techniques, to know how to please the partner, to achieve simultaneous orgasm. And that in doing this, sexuality was taken out of a larger context of mystery. That religion supplied a mysterious element to sexuality. And Ricoeur thinks that we're now beginning a new age, the third age, in the relationship between sex and religion, in which we're trying to recover that mysterious dimension of sexuality. He says in one place, I often talk about sex as a language, and Paul Ricoeur doesn't like that. He says sex is not logos, sex is not language, sex is eros. Sex is passion. Sex has got an irrational side to it. It's not supposed to be a cerebral activity. So Ricoeur sets up this idea of talking about sexuality as ultimately mysterious, as beyond us, an enigma, something that we never totally understand, that's beyond our comprehension, and that calls us to sort of enter into this gift that we received from God. Now, the other thing that Christianity, I think, is really good at is reminding us of the ambivalence of sexuality. Now, a lot of people, it's pretty clear to our young collegians, for example, that sex is good. I'm not sure that we Catholics got to run around anymore telling them that sex is good. We know we had a period, and some people are old enough to remember it, when sex was bad. Couldn't even talk about it. Fathers didn't tell their boys about sex because they were embarrassed to talk about it. And there was all this bit, if you masturbated, you were going to go blind. And there was all kind of negativity around sexuality. And I think some Catholic circles still think that we're fighting that. Well, I don't think we are anymore. I don't think that's the fight. The culture gives that message over and over. Sex is something good. I think that maybe our message today is that sexuality is ambivalent. That it's fundamentally good and grace, but it's threatened by sin. It's threatened by dysfunction. It can get out of control. And got all kind of bad things that happen. And the press helps us with this, too, with pedophilia cases. And sexual abuse and date rape. And all the other ways in which sex becomes exploitative. So what Christianity is good about is keeping us from pendulum swings. At least it should bring us back to some synthesis rather than a pendulum swing. Well, it's all bad, and, sex activity, don't even talk about it, repressive, all that. To swing over here, it's all wonderful, beautiful, and great. Whereas I think what Christianity does is keep some sort of synthesis between the fact that sex is graced but also threatened. It's got a dark side and that can easily get out of control. It's hard to think of other aspects of human life in which we can so easily deceive ourselves or rationalize our behavior, get carried away. Another perspective from moral theology that's helpful is to think of marriage as a covenant relationship. I've never been all that gung-ho about the language because I don't know that people are into covenant that much, but there's something good about it. The idea that marriage mirrors the relationship between God and the human family. Or as it gets specified in the New Testament, it mirrors and reflects the relationship between Christ and the church. Can't usually get into that passage without getting all upset about women being subservient to their husbands. But if one could get around that in Paul, there's something sort of beautiful about it
of saying that this relationship between husband and wife, this covenant, this deep partnership, this mutual sharing, is a sacrament. I like that better than covenant myself. It's a sacrament. It's a sign of something deeper. And in this case, even Paul says it's a sign of the relationship between Christ and the church. Intimate kind of union. It's a sign of God's covenant with the human family. Well, all of this is something that Aaron might keep in his mind as he's trying to sort out how he's going to deal with this new love relationship in his life. I borrowed the next part from Margaret Farley, fine moral theologian, who unfortunately is not able to come and be part of this series, although I invited her. She's recently president of the Catholic Theological Society. But anyway, she plays off of this, the unequal power relationship that's at work with Aaron and the secretary. And she says that we got to introduce justice into the way we think about sexual activity. Justice is important. And she thinks that that leads to a number of things. One, justice says you respect the autonomy of the other. I like the phrase, don't absorb the other into our agenda. All relationships have two people. Two people have to have their say. Don't absorb the other into our agenda. Has to be opportunity for dialogue about what's happening in the relationship and so on. Justice demands mutuality. I have a note, not complementarity. I think that's really ends up being destructive. I don't think it's helpful. Rosemary Ruthford taught me that in sharp, pointed ways. As soon as you talk complementarity and you talk about female roles and male roles and female characteristics and male characteristics, Rosemary said to me, if I let you talk like that, I will lose. The feminine characteristics will always get dominated by the male characteristics. It won't work. And I've come to accept that critique. I think that's right. I think mutuality suggests that we interact with the other on whatever they are, however they are, whatever their outlook, whether aggressive women or aggressive men, or passive men, passive women, whatever it is. But not to stereotype, not to suggest there are these particular roles or particular ways people have to act. I think that's finally destructive and causes difficulties. Justice demands there be inequality of power. How would Aaron do that with his secretary? Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. No, he'd have to bend over backwards not to use his power to coerce her. Then try very hard to be in some sort of mutual kind of friendship with her, if that's the direction it's going in. But he would really have to be careful, and so would she, not to be passive, subservient, dependent, worried she's going to lose her job or whatever. Commitment, which gives sex meaning. I'm going to talk more about that in the next section. So it's justice demands that sexual activity be fruitful, to grow in intimacy and so on, and to serve the common good. That's some way we don't think. Sometimes at marriages I preach like that. It's like this couple is now going to be a great resource for the community. But the whole emphasis is, well, they love one another and they've got this intimate relationship and they're going to do this and that and be happy together. But it's not the whole story, is it? They got responsibilities in a larger community. If they have a fruitful relationship, then it's going to spread good. It's going to serve the commonweal. It's going to help produce a better society. It's social capital that comes from a good marriage. It's a resource. I mean, it's obvious if you think about it that way. One of the things that enriches all of us are the good marriages around. They produce better children, and we have a better society as a result. So justice in relationships helps to serve the common good. The next thing I suggest is in this from moral theology is the dialogue with spirituality. That has enriched the whole area of moral theology and what Christian discipleship is all about. And part of this would be the way partners and marriages can be good for one another, to help them grow in various ways. So a partner can help the lover, to stay in good shape. I often think of that. The body is a gift given to the other. And so that becomes a reason for watching one's health or trying to stay in good shape. Keep the body as fit as it can be, because that's the gift. to the other person. So it's one way it would seem to me a spirituality would grow out of thinking of this in this sexual way. And also all of the ways in which the partner calls the other to become their better self, to want them to grow. And that's a beautiful gift to offer the other. I want you to be all you can be. I love it when I see you function well. It pleases me to see you develop in your own way, not maybe the way I want you to develop. I don't want a clone. I want a partner. I want somebody who's going to develop in their own way. And when that happens, instead of getting jealous or envious or upset or coercive, one rejoices in that. It's something what I mean when I'd say that marriage offers the opportunity for spiritual growth. I always get a kick of Andy Greeley's writings on this. You know, Greeley, it makes the claim that we Catholics are not as repressed as the secular media likes to make us look. Greeley's great claim is that Catholics have more fun at sex than anybody. You know, that Catholics have sex more frequently and enjoy it more, and that it's more spontaneous. He even thinks he knows why. It's not because of the sex lecture given by the priest in the 4th grade. No, he thinks it has to do with the image of God. The Catholics have a more positive image of God. They tend to see God as lover, as spouse. And this positive image of God, Greeley says, spills over into the sex life of married people. I have no idea what to make of that. He claims he has empirical data to support this. So we're now going to take a little survey here to see if we can corroborate his studies. How will I pose the question? Well, how are we going to help Aaron, I guess, to get through all of this? I've seen people like Aaron handle this thing 2 successful ways. One is goodbye to the secretary. That's it. No, I can't handle it. It's not good. It's not going to be good for my marriage, and so on. And somehow it isn't right, and I don't know where it's going, and I don't know if I can control it at this level. And I've known others, good Christian people, who have done it another way, who said, well, I'm going to keep this relationship. It's good. It's good for both of us. And what I need to do is to somehow keep it under control. I need to keep it from becoming genital. I need to keep it at some other level. And if I'm able to do that, I would be faithful to my conscience, and then I would be able to have the liberating, life-producing effects of this relationship. I'm thinking of very concrete cases now where I've seen people pull it off. And I'm thinking of one where the big thing was that he told his wife. Told his wife about the relationship, told him about his attraction, and made it always a point of conversation with her. And is able, out of that was part of his strength in keeping it under control. And his wife seemed to be at ease with that, said she was at ease with it. And as a result, he does keep it under control, and it is a life-giving relationship for him. I think what's really important, though, for Aaron is to make this relationship with his wife work. To take that energy that he's got flowing now and use it, employ it, get it into the relationship with his family. And so that he achieves sort of a new and deeper intimacy with his wife. A lot of that, I think, has to do with praying together, of getting more out of going to Mass together, so that somehow maybe they talk about it afterwards or discuss the readings or prepare in some way for it. So that becomes part of their intimacy, a fuller kind of expression that would keep them together. I think, too, that very often the answer to this kind of problem is to say, I have to give up something that is life-giving, self-actualizing, self-fulfilling. I have to give it up. Where the greatest value is not to be self-actualized, but the greatest value is to be charitable, to be loving, to be responsible. So I could well see Aaron saying, I'm going to miss something big in my life by cutting off that relationship with the secretary, but it's too dangerous and I can't handle it, and therefore I'm going to throw myself into the relationship at home. And do it consciously. I'm giving up something that is of value, something that's important, something that's energizing for me. And I do it willingly and without resentment because I want to be committed to my marriage and make it work. Now, there's another way to do that. That's to give it up with resentment. And that's a very different story. But it seems to me a sort of self-sacrificing attitude that says you can't have it all. The culture lies. It isn't true. Nobody can have it all. Nobody can have everything they want in this sexual realm or any other realm. There's limits. And to choose to be with this person means, and to be intimate, to have intercourse, to be married, means you can't do that with somebody else. But so there's a really fundamental point there that I'm not sure I've said it as well as I would like, but that it's just generally true of us. We can't have it all. And there's times when we have to say, there's a way I won't be fulfilled in this. I think that's part of the priestly celibacy. Seems to me the realistic thing is to say that if I was in a really good marriage, I'd be a lot better person. If I had a really good partner, a really good marriage, I'd be a much better person. I'd be more mature, I'd be more fulfilled, and so on. But I'm in a situation where I give that up, knowingly, for the sake of some other value. Hopefully, in terms of service to the larger community, availability to the larger community. I just feel a lot of stuff I read on this is not real to me. I think there's a giving up. Of course, if you end up in a bad marriage and a poor relationship, then none of that holds, I'm saying. But if a really good relationship could bring out things in people, bring out aspects, depths that we don't understand, parts of ourselves that are underdeveloped, I think that it's realistic to say, well, yeah, that would happen, but it's not going to be. I got this interesting phrase in here, flirting with prudence. It's an ambivalent phrase, as you can tell. We live in a culture now where you can't flirt effectively, because you get charged with sexual harassment or something. And I feel like that's a big loss. There's a chemistry between males and females. It's there, and to just deny it, to not be able to act on it, seems to me to be somehow a loss in terms of the overall situation. But of course, flirting with prudence suggests that one has to know there's two people involved in sort of that kind of activity. And some people can deal with it and some can't. And so maybe Aaron ought not, in the beginning, have flirted with his secretary because she's one who wasn't safe, because she had feelings for him. Now, if Aaron was on the ball and attuned, he probably would have figured out that the secretary had feelings for him or was interested in him, and he'd have said, I sense that. I pick up the vibes, therefore she's off limits. That would be another way of thinking about how to handle it. So I'm thinking that one of the skills needed in a culture which says that males and females interact pretty freely, and that married men go out with other women, and married women dance with other men at parties, and all of that. One of the skills, it seems to me, that is needed in that kind of culture is to catch signals quickly of sort of who's safe and who isn't, and how things might be interpreted. Well, that's longer than I expected to spend on that. Let me move to the second one. This is has to do with premarital sex and talking about a typical young collegiate couple, very much in love, very sexually attracted to one another, and they're trying to figure out how to handle the sexual drive, what to do about all of that. They're have strong temptations. They have intercourse. They haven't done that yet. They're trying to figure out whether they want to do it or not, whether that seems proper to them. Their Catholic background, there's something that tells them that they really ought not have intercourse. That isn't the right thing to do. They're trying to figure out how to keep restraints on their relationship, trying to understand themselves and what makes them tick, and so on. Well, again, sort of a cultural analysis to understand this. I mean, they got all this sexual stimuli all around. Don't have to
talk much about that. Although I am struck by the sort of idealistic character of it. If you're watching a movie, the two people involved are very attractive. Their bodies are terrific. And the sex is great. I mean, that's all we see. It's television, movies, books, and so on. I mean, and so, in a sense, this young couple is getting a sort of idealized picture of what sexual activity is all about. And the other thing that is clear is that in our culture that young people are coming to puberty earlier and getting married later. And all that time getting bombarded with more and more explicit sexual stimuli. Not an easy world for our young people in trying to handle all of this. They got a long time. And especially this couple met when they're sophomores in school. They don't want to get married till they're graduated, and they got a long period of time to try to handle their strong sexual urges. There's an interesting phrase that I put in there, borrowed from somebody, that in the culture today, that the fig leaf moves from the genitals to the face. Part of that is the notion that sexuality gets equated with genital sex, that all this young couple can think about is getting in bed and having intercourse. And that's part of the message of our times. There is, as it says here, a flight from affective sexuality, fleeing from intimacy, where the sexual activity becomes sort of the be-all, end-all of the relationship. A lot of that seems to be what's causing the trivialization of sex. We got a rise in impotency problems. Why would that? Right when we're getting rid of all the repression, why would we have more impotency problems? Well, one of the ideas is that it creates a sense of performance. One has to perform well, performing well in bed, high value, and that very pressure makes it hard to do it well, so we get male impotency, premature ejaculation out of this desire to perform well. Again, I borrow a lot from Paul Ricoeur in this what he calls the trivialization of sex in our culture. It's the idea is that, well, if you can do anything with anybody you want, anything goes, then everything seems to lose its meaning. There's nothing terribly significant. If you have sex with anybody, any place, any time, then sex activity loses its specialness. I remember in a conversation in my class last year, we were talking about sexuality, and one young woman says, well, my parents taught me that sex was a beautiful and great gift, and that I should save it for that one special person. I found a sort of simple beauty in that. This is a countercultural kind of statement. And one would think that, well, there's a good chance that it will be special, with that kind of attitude. So if anything goes, nothing's special. I think there's a deep truth in all of that. Although I must say that with the young people today, it's really wrong to think, the older generation, to think that we got a promiscuous younger generation. Believe me, we don't. We don't. Fidelity is a tremendous value for our young people. Being with one person, and while you're with that person, or being faithful to that person, is very strong value. In fact, it's a tighter kind of situation than with older adults. With older adults, it's fine if one's partner has lunch with somebody else or dances with somebody else at a party. For a lot of our young people, that's really not allowed. It's a tighter kind of exclusive relationship than even prevails in the dominant older culture. So I think that promiscuity, well, obviously there's a certain amount of that, but I think it's just wrong to think of that being the dominant sense of young people today, and certainly not of our Catholic collegians. Well, many people say fear of AIDS. Well, that's why they're like that, because fear of AIDS. Well, okay. Maybe. If it works, ride it. Well, why not go with it? And if it helps, if it's helping in some ways, why not? Well, in trying to present some perspectives to this young couple, I borrowed here from Tony Kosnick and his book, Human Sexuality. It was done by the Catholic Theological Society and a group of moral theologians, and they tried to give guidance to these young people. Instead, one thing is to say, hey, fornication is wrong, don't do it. It's a mortal sin, don't do it. Well, maybe moral theology tries to do better than that, suggest some values to keep in mind. And so I often use these in talking to young people. Sexual activity should be self-liberating. Well, that's a nice thing to say to a young woman who is afraid she's going to have sex with her boyfriend because she's afraid if she doesn't, he's going to walk out. That sexual activity is not self-liberating, it's self-enslaving. She's in bad shape. So if she followed this value, she'd do better. It should be other enriching. It ought to do good for the other person. So guys walking around seeing how many sexual conquests he can have is violating that. It's doing the other person really no good. Should be honest. No, and the way I would like to say that is that the amount of sexual expression for this couple should fit the commitment and love and fidelity that's there, should correspond. And I think they're well off if it develops gradually. So you don't think that people who are on their second date should have intercourse. Doesn't make sense. On the other hand, we wouldn't think that people who are engaged and ready to close to marriage need to be 2 feet apart all the time. I mean, so you get sort of a correlation between physical expression, if it's honest, and the amount of love and commitment that's there. And of course, what the Christian tradition keeps saying is that intercourse makes most sense when it is connected with the full commitment that we associate with marriage, the full life of fidelity that we associate with marriage. And I'm quoting there in that phrase, associated with marriage, from a document the bishops issued called Empowering by the Spirit. Powered by the Spirit. It actually says that in that document. The activity should reflect the kind of commitment and fidelity we associate with marriage. It's a quote. I happen to have written that. That's how I know that. So I thought that was one of the better